Hello, everybody. We're happy that you've been able to join us tonight for this presentation. We really worked hard on trying to be as concise as possible so we could make the most out of the time we have with you this afternoon. My name is Angela Lopez, and I am a shareholder and head of the immigration group. And with me tonight is attorney Michelle Alonso, also a shareholder. Michelle.
Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm also here as a shareholder with Cowles Thompson. I've been working with Angela for several years.
Yeah, we've been together for a few years,
Yes.
and we exclusively just practice immigration. And I would say that between the two of us, we could fairly say that we've been doing immigration for a little bit over 30 years. And that's a lot of years. Let me just do a few reminders, as I mentioned before, for those of you who didn't join earlier, so we were trying to kind of keep people busy here. We have unmuted all participants during the presentation. We want people to be able to enjoy the presentation, to get the most out of the presentation, and therefore you're going to be in mute. At the end of the presentation, we will do our best to have as much time as possible for you to ask questions. I know we all have a lot of questions. Believe me, attorneys, we are as curious, and our expectations are also high for the new administration and how things will evolve in the next few weeks after the new administration takes over. Tonight, as the title says, we are just going to kind of go over some of the things or expectations and what people have been hearing in the news and other social media outlets. So we wanted to start with what is current. And current, we're not going to go over the legislation or the rules or regulations that have been issued in terms of immigration since 2016. We're just going to go over the ones or the legislation rules that would more likely be affected once the new administration is in, which means either is going to legislation or regulations that is going to be suspended, or that might be modified or stopped, whichever the Biden administration decides to do. So there is one rule that will be in effect, is already in effect, and will be in effect at least through March 31st, unless the administration takes explicit action to suspend it. And this is the proclamation that was issued at the beginning of the pandemic last year, when travel into the United States was suspended. If you recall, we did a couple of webinars last year to go over the different rules, because there were more than one throughout the year, suspending people from entering the United States. And the last one that was done, and I believe it was either August or September or October last year, was supposed to expire on December 31st. Well, the administration extended it to March 31st. So reality is that most consulates and U.S. embassies around the world, they're only kind of processing visas on an urgent or emergency basis. We're not seeing a lot of movement specifically for green card petitions. So that still remains stopped. We do not know I would say that the buzz out there is that this may be a proclamation that the Biden administration may just keep in place for a few days, or might modify depending on how the COVID virus is responding in the different countries around the world, mainly to keep the US population protected. Then we have a few rules or regulations that will take effect after the inauguration. And these rules more than likely will be delayed by 60 days by the Biden administration. because they have already announced that on day one, they are going to issue a memorandum suspending for 60 days any midnight legislation or regulation, meaning any regulation that could have had entered into effect days before they took over or day after took over or in the near future after they are inaugurated. So these are the three that are supposed to take effect. One is January 22nd, the other is on February 3rd, and the last one is on March 3rd. We're going to focus on the third one. Briefly, I'm just going to say that the first one, the proposed rule on security bars and processing, has to do mainly with background checks and how people are processed to come to enter the United States or to obtain a benefit. Mainly background check, fingerprints, and other items. The second one is the DHS's and DOL direct final rule to extend discretionary Secretary of Labor review to H-2B and BALCA cases. That's very procedural and technical, and we're not going to get into that one because it really won't help us to understand what might be happening in the near future once the new administration is in. But the one that, the last one, the USCIS or DHHS H-1B wage-based lottery final rule, that's the one that will take effect on March 9. And is the one that has many of us practitioners and private sector and individuals very worried because it is a very harsh in terms of how the lottery process, for those of you who are not familiar with the H-1B process, let me just give you a quick explanation. The H-1B visas have a numerical limitation, and we'll do another webinar for that, where the Department of Immigration only gives so many visas per year. And because usually they receive more petitions than visas available, so they ended up doing a lottery. So, and it really is a lottery. So people that are subject to the H-1B lottery, they don't know whether or not they're going to be able to process an H-1B until the lottery is run. So this regulation that was first published in November 20 and then went through the different processes to become a law will enter in effect on the 9th. But like we said, it's probably going to be suspended for an additional 60 days so the Biden administration can review. Basically, what this regulation does is to change how the applications for H-1B will be selected. And it's going to be basically based on the highest wage. If you're familiar with the H-1B and the immigration system, they use a prevailing wage determination system created by the Department of Labor with 4 levels. And the first level is entry level, and as individuals or the occupation has more responsibilities or supervisory duties, then the wage start increasing from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So what this is doing or pretends to do is to change how the applications for the CAP are going to be selected, and they will start with the highest wages within the occupation, within the area of employment. To the point that even the administration, some of the administration spokespeople have said that if this system becomes into effect, prevailing wage level 1 petitions will not make it into the lottery. They will be eliminated before they run the lottery, which will be very unfair and difficult because many people who graduate from college, they start in entry-level positions, and entry-level positions usually are level 1. So what they're saying is those H-1Bs will not be selected through this system if this rule is in effect. Very one thing, however, even with the suspension, if the rule becomes or get into effect, if the rules becomes effective, let's say the new administration, after delaying the rule 60 days, they still allow the implementation of the rule, then it will not be in effect and time to affect the H-1B cap visa lottery process for this year. So even if it becomes in effect, then it will be applicable to next year's cap visa lottery. So hopefully will never be coming into effect, but that's the reality with that one. So we'll stay put on that one, and we'll give you more updates as things evolve. Current immigration policies under rules under litigation. So as you can see, there's a bunch of rules and regulations that the administration issued last year, and they were enjoined, meaning they went to court. There were lawyers and people involved that filed lawsuits against the administration, and most of those regulations are suspended, but there's a couple that is still in effect. For example, one that is suspended is the fee rule. If you recall, USCIS wanted to increase the fees. In some cases, doubling up the fee that they had in effect, which would have made it very difficult for some individuals to process applications. That one is suspended. Public charge, and Michelle will give you more information about that. That one has been suspended, and then has been current, and then is suspended, and then is current, and now is current, and we don't even know what's going to happen with that one. Hopefully it won't happen.
We're still pretty dizzy about that one.
Asylum bars eligibility, we're not going to get into that. That is also suspended. Third country transit ban, that is if you're applying for a visa in a third country, then you might have had some difficulties getting in. The DACA memo, remember, they suspended DACA, then they had to reopen for renewals. Now we're back opening for everybody. That's still being litigated. And again, we go back with procedures for asylums and withholding of removals. That is also suspended. So litigation will continue. And although some people are speculating that, well, once the new administration takes over or is in, more than likely this litigation will die because no one will pursue it. Well, the administration can be replaced, and other people can take the place of the administration to continue to pursue the litigation to defend these regulations, which is expected. Same thing happened when President Obama, the transition, some of the rules and regulations that were in effect that they had been, they were in litigation. When the administration and President Obama left, then there were other people who took over for him and continued to the litigation, to the point that a few of the rules and regulations that people were trying to stop, that he issued during his presidency, and after he left, maybe a year, a couple years after he has left, finally the court entered the final rules, and actually the legislation that he was entering was successful, and the rules stay in place. So litigation will not necessarily stop because we have a new president. On the contrary, I think it will continue. Litigation is here to stay. The other rules that are pending, and these are really pending in terms that they have not gone through all the steps necessary to become law or a regulation, and very unlikely are going to be completed or finalized before the new administration takes over. So this is more than likely will be rescinded. And these two are the proposed rule and provisional waivers. And those are the waivers for people who overstay here for many years, and before they get a green card, they needed to obtain a waiver in the United States. Well, the Trump administration was trying to get rid of that provision, and we'll see what happened there. And the other rule was the H-4 EADs. And the H-4 EADs is the legislation that allows H-4 dependents to have EAD documents, employment authorization documentation, if the principal spouse or applicant has an I-140 approved. Again, this administration was trying to get that program rescinded, but it was not completed, and more than likely the new administration will not pursue it, because these two regulations were entered under President Obama, and it's very likely that President Biden will continue these programs. The goals. The new administration, the Biden plan for securing, that's what the name of his plan is. Plan for securing our values as a nation of immigrants. In the first part of the plan, that is about 20 pages, and you can find it online. He says, as President Biden will forcefully pursue policies that safeguard our security, provide a fair and just system that helps to grow and enhance our economy, and secure our cherished values. The goals are to take urgent action to undo Trump's damage and reclaim America's values. Modernize American immigration system, welcome immigrants in our communities, reassert Americans' commitment to asylum seekers and refugees, tackle the root causes of irregular immigration, and implement effective border screening. If you see the difference in colors, is because we're going to focus on the blue ones rather than the black ones, and the ones in black. The ones in blue are the ones that we believe are the ones more that affect more the clients that we serve, and the people that probably are attending this webinar. So with that, I'll pass the microphone to Ms. Michelle.
Thank you, Angela. So one of the most interesting comments on the Biden and Harris administration's website regarding the first 100 days is this sort of itemized action plan, which when we look at it, it sounds like it has a lot of meat, and it really is just going, like Angela mentioned, to reverse some of these specific actions that were taken. But we do believe that once they go in and look into the basis for some of these changes that were proposed under this previous administration, we do believe that they're going to actually revisit how they will propose anything different. Certainly it'll be different. It just will have to be based on data that's actually verifiable. So one of the number one things was reverse family separation. A lot of what got a lot of media coverage was the border separation that was happening for asylum seekers through our southern border. And as Angela mentioned, a lot of the Trump administration had put forth policies and memorandums on how they wanted to control the flow of asylum seekers and refugees, or asylum seekers coming in through the southern border, because they're not just coming from obviously Mexico, but they're coming from what they call the Triangle, which is Central American countries that are currently undergoing a lot of civil strife and gang violence, and migrating north. So what the administration had done was MPP courts, and those courts and the entire system and all the memorandums behind all of that is something that the Biden administration is really looking to undo. So that's number one. And that goes into number two and number three and number four. So, and even for ending prolonging the prolonged detentions. So all of those are really hitting on a lot of those hot button topics that you would have seen over the course of last year, particularly. The surge of humanitarian resources at the border that one's interesting, and one worth noting, because a lot of the time the government has previously worked with non-government organizations, NGOs, and other nonprofits to help in the more humanitarian side of immigration. And what we saw under the Trump administration was a lot of severed ties with these particular organizations. So it'd be interesting to see how this new administration will look at revisiting and bringing in those NGOs or nonprofits to come and assist, and maybe what new restrictions or requirements they would have on them on sort of these partnerships and sort of trying to handle this. Because at the end of the day, the funding and is necessary, because there is a large surge of folks that come in through the southern border. This is something that we just frankly have to address and assess well as a country. So we'll move on to 6, the reverse of public charge. Angela mentioned it, and it's because our heads are dizzy. Reversing public charge. The public charge rule was implemented with the goal of trying to assess whether or not a potential immigrant, a legal permanent resident, would eventually come to rely on federal government assistance of any sort. So there is a public charge component that's built into family-based immigration. Asylum seekers are exempt from it, and employment-based applicants don't have to worry about it, because the idea is they're coming through a sponsored employment. There's no need to look at that. Somebody's already attesting to the fact that they'll pay them a certain salary. So on the family base, this was interesting. Some of the requirements that were put in for this public charge. So what we saw is public charge rule went into effect. Then there was litigation, so it was suspended. Then they came back and said, wait a minute, you can implement part of it. So at the end of the day, it's still a current requirement. Whether we're going to see a reversal of it, they promised it. It's yet to come. We'll see what happens, but that's one of the major items that we would see. Honestly, it's caused a huge headache for a lot of practitioners and clients alike, so I wouldn't mind to see this one go either. And the national emergency that allows diverting funds to build a border wall. If you may recall, the reason why we've been allowed to divert funds to the southern border for the erection of the wall was because we've declared a national emergency because of the influx of immigrants coming through the southern border. Again, it's going to depend on what do they want to hear. Obviously, this administration has made it clear that they don't see the justification for the declaration of the national emergency. So by removing the national emergency in that point, they will be able to stop funding for the border wall. Another one that's close to home is protecting dreamers and their families. Obviously, the Trump administration made it very clear they wanted to terminate DACA. That was defeated on procedural grounds, and basically the time is up. So with DACA back in place and restored back to its original 2012 version, it'll be interesting to see what this administration will do to go beyond DACA. I heard one soundbite which was actually compelling. They said DACA is the floor, not the ceiling, meaning that deferred action for childhood arrivals by way of employment authorization and travel authorization in limited circumstances is just not enough. They want to see a path to citizenship, and they also want to promote family unification, and that's why they also want to extend that sort of help to the families of these dreamers. Number 9 on their list is rescinding the travel and refugee bans. Now, this is going beyond the travel bans that we have in place that were put in place as a result of COVID-19. Angela mentioned those went into effect in March of last year, and those are still in place. But before that, we had also travel bans in place that the Biden administration wants to since remove. So we'll see about the rescinding of those. Most notably, the Muslim ban, believe it or not, is still in effect, and that's one of the ones that they want to immediately rescind. Order immediate review of TPS. If you haven't seen this on your news feed, the Temporary Protected Status Program has been undergoing a lot of changes. They've been trying to end findings of certain countries or citizens of certain countries to be given TPS so they can start closing out the program. The idea is they just want to go back and visit all those countries and the conditions in those countries that form the basis for extending TPS, temporary protected status. So again, be interesting to see how that is worked out and arranged. And restore sensible enforcement priorities. This is number 11. This one is the one that sticks out the most to me. More recently, because basically under the Trump administration, it was considered a free-for-all in terms of enforcement. What the previous administration had done was had a tier system regarding priority for enforcement actions. And when you talk enforcement actions, we're basically talking about deportation or removal. Who are they going to act on with the limited resources that the government has for executing and putting through foreign nationals through the deportation immigration court review? With those limited resources, who are we going to focus on? The Trump administration had eliminated the very specific tiered approach, and basically the Biden administration is, from what we see here, is signaling that they want to resurrect that prioritization. So then we're not done. We're still going through the first 100. They have a very, very aggressive agenda for the first 100 days. Number 12, ensure ICE and CBP abide by professional standards. Again, there are suggestions that maybe they have been less than professional. I think it's nice for them to mention that. Number 13, protect military service individuals and their families from deportation. Under what's a crazy twist in interpretation of the law, there have been service members who have gone through deportation. For whatever reasons there were, this administration wants to go back and revisit if there's a way for them to be brought back and as an honor for their service, and perhaps even extend those benefits to their families. So I'd be interested to see how this develops. 14, 15, and 16, restore and defend naturalization process, the revitalization of the task force on new Americans to boost economy and promote basically immigrant entrepreneurship. And the last one is convene a regional meeting. So all of these, the restoring and defending naturalization process, the fact is they want to make the naturalization process a little bit more streamlined. If any of you have been going through naturalization or know anyone who has, you'll know it's multiple years right now. Most offices are taking 1 year to 2 years, and that's just too long. They're hearing that there's a way to possibly fast track this. So again, let's see. We can only wait and see. For number 15, the revitalizing. This one's interesting. They're basically trying to promote the boost of the economy. Basically, rural areas and city areas have a different attrition of immigrants and unemployment. So there's this one of those sound bites that is trying to align those objectives. Again, we'll see what comes of that. In terms of number 16, this one's really going outside of Homeland Security. It's really, I think, one that's more geared towards international relations, but it's convene a regional meeting of the leaders, as we were talking about the triangle for El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and then of course our southern neighbor Mexico and Canada, to address the driving migration. The fact is we have mass migration coming in through the southern border, and we have our MASC, which was former NAFTA, in place. So there's a couple of treaties and agreements that need to be aligned, and also try to get to the heart of what we're doing to keep from these surges coming in through the southern border. Those are the first 100 days. Oh, Angela, we can't hear you.
Better now?
Yes.
Okay. I was very amused listening to Michelle, so I forgot I was unmuted. So then we go into modernizing American immigration system. This is the one that Michelle and I had been reviewing more carefully, because it is probably the one that will affect the most our customers, our clients, since it touches on temporary work visas and green cards and other things. So what they're and this is a long-term plan. The first 100 days, it was all about undoing some of the things done by the administration. They'll be reviewing them and trying to either replace or get rid of and advance their agenda. And this phase is in a long term, and to issue more permanent legislation that will allow them to accomplish what they're set out to do. Create a roadmap for the nearly 11 million of people who have lived in the United States for years. Um, I really, really, and I wouldn't say we really, really, really want to know how this one is going to work, because this is the one that breaks all negotiations. And well, now that they have control of of Congress, the House and Senate, and the presidency, maybe they'll be able to pass comprehensive immigration reform in the first 2 years. Hopefully, this is not going to be that little stone in the shoes that is going to stop him, because when all the conversations are focused on the 11 million of people who have been living in the United States, we're talking about people who have no legal status, and that is what dominates the conversation. Instead of focusing on other subjects or items that could be easily changed without so much um, controversy. So then we'll see how this is going to work, and we're all for it. We think it's fair. It's fair if they're already here, and most of the people who are already here, they are hardworking, good people. So I think it's fair that finally they get to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Reform,
Angela,
yes.
I will mention that when I was going back over there, part of their emphasis is regarding the filing of taxes and passing background checks. So it looks like there's definitely a financial component there.
What
So
and it's
filing
consistent.
taxes.
It's consistent with what we have always told people through the years. I mean, we go back to, I don't know, 2000, when we always tell people, when you hear people talking about comprehensive immigration reform, or that we're going to help some people without status to get into a regular status, they always mention a few things, and among those is taxes
Yes.
and good moral character, no criminal offenses. They are always at the top of the list. So doesn't surprise me that that's what they will, and it's always been kind of in the agenda. Reform the visa program for temporary workers in selective industries. Here is where we have the H-1Bs, the H-2Bs, agricultural workers is already there too. The E's, the L's, all those in selective industries. I think that when I start looking at this modernized American immigration system, I saw a few things that are that have a lot in common with the agenda President Trump had for the last 4 years, because he was trying to be very selective. And when I start looking at this, saying reform the visa program for temporary workers in selective industries, that means, as Trump was also trying to do, only give those visas depending on the sector that most needed it, not necessarily for everybody. So we go back to being selective, and that is always an item of concern, because we don't know what selective means. Reforms the temporary visa system to establish a wage-based allocation process and establish enforcement mechanisms to ensure that they are aligned with the labor market and not used to undermine wages. And this is also one of those things that Trump, if you notice the last regulations of the things that we went over before, that are taking effect after inauguration day, or that are or will take effect in the future, are wage-based reforms, meaning the high wage earners are the ones that are going to get the visas. So we're looking at high skilled workers, very selective. We're looking at a system that is looking for the best, the brighter, and the knowledgeable people, which is one of those things that the Trump administration was also, and they did try to change and enforce in the last 4 years, and they were successful to a certain extent, but some of the legislation was never approved. They will support expanding the number of high-skilled visas and eliminating the limits on employment-based visas by country, which created unacceptable loan backlogs. We love this one.
Yes.
Okay. Expanding the number of high-skilled visas, great. We need more high-skilled workers. And definitely, people shouldn't have to be subject to waiting 8, 9, 10 years to get a green card. It makes no sense. That brings me to, I have a friend, he's a Canadian attorney, and I always say this. I think you have heard me saying this in multiple presentations, but he was right. The United States has great immigration system in terms that we have the laws and the programs to allow people to come into the United States to get the education, to get prepared, to learn. But then when it comes to working, we don't have the system in place. So they go to Canada. So my friend from Canada was always happy because we did the education in the United States, and then they were the ones who enjoyed the fruit of that education because they went to Canada with their system is very friendly to those who have an education. So there you go. That's what they're trying to do here, to change it and make it more favorable to those high skilled visas worker. Modernize it. They will also provide a path to legalization for agricultural workers who have worked for years. We go to Michelle's area of one of the areas of expertise, her H2Bs, right?
Well, H2Bs, and it also seems to conjure up, if anybody remembered, saw we had agricultural worker programs that were in place during the 80s. So when we saw this on the list, it just sort of had that spirit of those, because these were people who had to prove that they'd been working in agricultural. They had to show pay records or letters from their former employers and attest to what kind of work that they did. And this is opposite of what Angela was talking about. These are not high skilled workers at all. These are your agricultural workers that are out there and working in the more rural parts of the country where, unfortunately, despite unemployment, employers are still proven that they cannot find U.S. workers to fill these positions. So we'll see if this is a resurrection of the SAW program or anything similar.
Correct. Yep. The next one is, and this one, Michelle and I were talking about this one because it really called our attention. The title on that and this one is Reject the False Choice Between Employment-Based and Family-Based Immigration. There is
it's
no
confusing.
Well, there's no, it's misleading because, and then we kind of got into reading what they are proposing, and it has nothing to do with whether it's a choice between employment-based and family. It's not a false choice. We do have an immigration system of 2 tracks. One track is employment-based and the other track is family-based. And yes, sometimes people can choose whether they go through their family and whether or they go through employment, but many people don't have those choices because they don't have families in the United States, so they have to go through employment. So it's not a false choice. In many instances, it's the only choice. But what we kind of took from there is that what they were trying to say is that they want to eliminate family separation, and they want to support family-based immigration by preserving family unification that Michelle mentioned at the beginning, and they want to create a temporary visa for those individuals that have to wait for many years after the initial petition is approved. Let me give you an example. For brothers, sisters, or for children, or even spouses of legal permanent residents versus citizens. This is not happening right now, but it's happened many times in the past, and we anticipate it might happen again, where they're waiting list. So even if the person living in the United States, the US citizen or the legal permanent resident in the United States, obtains the approval of the main petition, then the family members have to wait outside the United States, if that is the case, for years before they have the ability to enter as visitors, because as immigrants, because there is a waiting list for immigrants. So what they're saying is, once the initial petition is approved, we'll look for a way to give people temporary visa so they can come into the United States and wait for that final petition to get through uh, in the United States with their family members, which is kind of different from the title, right?
It doesn't, the title doesn't seem to jive with what they're trying to promote, but that's the best we could demystify it.
Yeah. Preserve preference for diversity in the current system. That means for some of you that you may know, we have the diversity, the lottery, diversity visa
Visa.
lottery. Yes. And Michelle can tell you a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, so the system allows for countries that are not heavily subscribed. So if any of you have ever had to follow the visa bulletin because you're subject to a preference category, you'll see that highly subscribed countries are identified, and then we have a category that's considered worldwide. So some of those oversubscribed countries will include China, India, Vietnam, um, Philippines, Mexico. So these are what we call oversubscribed countries. So the diversity visa allows for those who do not come from those countries to be able to basically try for a lottery. And if they're selected and they meet certain requirements, they could essentially come in by sheer luck of the lottery under the diversity visa to come in. That had been suspended for some time. And the idea is that they want to make sure that this program doesn't go away because they want to promote, again, diversity in terms of immigration into the United States.
Yeah, and also because when they say preserve is because Trump administration had said it many times, and they were even trying to draft legislation to do away with that specific program. So
Exactly.
yes, increase the number of visas offered for permanent work-based, immigration-based, and macroeconomic conditions. We love it. I think we can spend the rest of the time talking about this one. Again, we go back to, it is unbelievable how some people, some individuals, to that point, the example we always give is many of our clients are physicians, healthcare workers, and many of our physicians from countries like India or China, the average time they have to wait to complete their green card process, it is up to about 8 to 10 years, in some cases 12 years. These are highly skilled individuals that can get a green card. In the meantime, they have to continue to have temporary status until the day comes. So this is always welcome. It is music to our ears. Hopefully something will be done because it's unfair. It's a very unfair system. Something that we noticed in these 20 pages of proposal is this one that says that they want to exempt from the cap recent PhD graduates from STEM careers, and STEM stands for science, technology, engineers, and math in the United States. And they go as far as saying that once they obtain the PhD degree, they should also get the green card immediately. Amen. That sounds amazing. This is exactly what we want them to do, but with not just PhD. How about masters? How about doctors, physicians that do the fellowships, the residencies, they get the medical licenses? Let's give them the green card as well. Let's not stop at PhDs, because we can make a better and more flexible system. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, and then continuing on, they want to create a new visa category to allow cities and counties to petition for higher levels of immigrants to support for growth. This goes back to what I mentioned previously. We'll see what this is going to look like. This seems to have some similarity, some basis to what we have heard from, like, for example, the EB-5 program. The EB-5 program is for investors to come in, and they're supposed to show they're helping in these areas to trigger job growth, right? They want to create more jobs. You create more jobs, you stimulate the economy. So this seems to be a push for some of these cities or some of these municipalities that might be struggling or trying to attract workers, for example, trying to get corporate campuses. It'd be interesting to see how this would come into about how a city, county, or municipality could go into this program, how this would be shaped. Again, if it's going to help the economy, I'd be very interested to see sort of the framework of that program. I think much like everything with immigration, they seem to borrow a little bit from here, a little bit from there. So it seemed to hearken a little bit from the EB-5 requirements in terms of job creation. Again, that one will be interesting to follow. Number 9, enforce the rules to protect American and foreign workers alike. Well, that's again a common theme that we've seen under the Trump administration. So this actually is pretty spot on. The whole idea behind a lot of the Trump policies, at least what they were stating, was in terms of protecting the American worker and protecting the foreign workers from abuse. So again, this is actually sounds exactly like what the outgoing administration, one of their top priorities. So I thought that was interesting that they kind of threw that in there. Number 10, expand protections for undocumented immigrants who report labor violations. So under the Obama administration, they'd expanded the U visa program to include labor violations, again, to try to capture where there was perhaps visa abuse or some sort of worker abuse by some of these petition organizations. And so they were allowing the U visa to be a vehicle. That kind of took a pause during this administration. It looks like they just want to see this through and make sure that they can set the groundwork for that program. And then 11, increase the visas for domestic violence survivors. I don't think anyone's going to object to any of that. Of course, any way that we can help these domestic violence survivors, the way if they report crimes, we can get some of these bad actors off the streets and also help give them some sort of protection and a way out through work authorization, eventually green card status. So definitely that's something we'd look forward to seeing.
Yeah. Then the last one is implement effective border screening. And that kind of speaks by itself. Very short. I just don't think they had time to think about this one because I don't think anybody knows. And one of them is to invest in better technology coupled with privacy protections at the border and invest heavily in improving the aging infrastructure at all of our ports of entry. I know.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, unless you're living on the border and you're familiar, at least we're here based in Texas, so the southern Texas border, I mean, there's a whole border culture. There is a way that people flow from Mexico to the US and back and forth just for shopping, for work. A lot of people will cross the border. The problem is that infrastructure is old, it is aged, and it's having a lot of struggle to keep up with the modern influx and the modern flow. I mean, a lot of people are moving a lot than they used to. Of course, a lot of less travel than in previous time, but again, there's definitely a push to try to improve the flow between the two countries because it is old.
But it's not just the south border; it's at all
Oh, no.
our ports of entry. Many of our states and main airports where you see international travel, many of them are the infrastructure is so old. We're lucky. We have DFW that is the top of the top. Is one of the, I believe somebody said the other day, is one of the 5 biggest and more technologically advanced airports in the United States. So, but you gotta go and see other cities where we have international travel, and honestly, you wonder how they're functioning. So yes, I think it's about time to work on infrastructure. Improve cross-agency collaboration, that goes without saying. I think every administration tries to work on this. One of the problems that we see is that many of the systems they still use are very obsolete. And that was more obvious during this last year than ever, when for some agencies, everything is paperless, so we have no problems working with them and via email communications or uploading, downloading documents. That's easy, doable, secure servers. Department of Labor, Department of State. But when it comes to the Department of Immigration, everything is a paper filing. 3 pages, 1 petition, pictures, everything has to go in a physical file. So that being said, it's difficult to share information with other agencies. So the Department of State doesn't know what the Department of Immigration is doing. And those are 2 agencies that are supposed to be working closely together to complete petitions. The Department of Labor has no idea how the Department of Immigration processes certain cases. And the Department of Immigration officers in many instances do not understand the prevailing wage system the Department of Labor has implemented. Consulates and embassies don't have access to the USCIS records some people have here, so they have to kind of go by whatever the Department of State has available, even if the individual has a file longer than this room with the USCIS. So yes, it goes without saying, it would probably make our system more effective and efficient to share communication information.
I will add that interagency collaboration has been a focus for the previous administration and even under Obama, and that has improved only because we are seeing where later on in petitions things are being brought up. Wait a minute, it looked like you may have been fingerprinted over here. That was never mentioned on a petition. So that's been interesting, that's been improving. Another thing about cross-agency collaboration, this also is in furtherance of the Real ID Act and sort of getting the states on board with identification requirements. And so if you've ever had any trouble with your driver's license corresponding and having them check immigration status, if it's wrong on the immigration, on the USCIS or Department of Homeland Security website, we have a heck of a time trying to get the state agency to still issue a driver's license renewal. So, you know, improving cross-agency collaboration would be very helpful for everybody.
And the last one, we'll work with Mexico and Canada as partners to build a partnership grounded on respect and pursue shared interest. Again, we have NAFTA, USMCIS, almost didn't pass, finally passed, improved in May. The improvement was amazing, and thanks God, we preserved the TM visa. There were no changes to the TM visa, so that's a good thing. And definitely, better relationships. But I think that goes along with enforcing security at the borders, because it is sad when you hear and see the statistics at the south border specifically, not just about people crossing the border, but about drugs, human trafficking, and abuses in all sorts. We need to humanize that part of our legislation. So this is, I know it sounds very short, and it is short. We only focus this presentation and points that are relevant to the conversation and probably to some of the statuses of the people who are attending this webinar. We didn't want to focus on the other aspects, but if you want to see the entire legislation, you just get, or the entire plan, please go to joebiden.com/immigration/ they have the entire plan posted on their website, and it's 20 pages with short explanations, but it's there, and hopefully they'll accomplish most of what they're saying they will try to get done within the next 4 years. Now we're going to go into questions. So if anybody has a question, please unmute the microphone, ask your question, or if you want to write the question on the chat, please do it. And we'll try to answer every question we can. Okay. So I don't see any questions. We did have and we did receive a few questions this afternoon via email. So let me address a couple of those and then we can move on. One of them, the person that asked the question, she wanted to know specifically what we anticipate happening with the H4 EAD program. And we already mentioned that, but if Michelle wants to kind of emphasize on that one, go ahead.
Well, so the good news is this was a policy that was put in place under the Obama administration when President-elect Biden was still vice president. So we assume, and everything seems to indicate, that the H-4 EAD is not going to go anywhere, that it's still going to survive, that even though the Trump administration was seeking to eliminate that option, it's still going to stand. And like Angela mentioned, they're not going to push on, they're most likely going to rescind the attempt to eliminate the H-4 EAD.
Okay. There's a question here on the chat. It says, what happened to cancellation of deportation?
Okay. So cancellation of deportation or cancellation removal, it's still an option that's available in removal court. So far, they have not announced any new relief that you would have available to you in removal proceedings or in deportation. So if you have a deportation order or you are in removal proceedings, you need to be working closely with your attorney or seeking other counsel to figure out what your options are, because this landscape is changing in terms of processing, but in terms of relief, we haven't seen any signals for change in substantive relief.
Correct. Somebody also this afternoon, they were asking about, well, there's another question here on the chat. Is there going to be any change in the 2-year home residency requirement after a J1, after J1 physician? Physicians, J1 2-year foreign residency requirement. As we mentioned, most of our clients are physicians. And physicians come into the United States, many of them, on a special visa, which is the J1. And that visa requires them to go back home for 2 years after they're done with their training, fellowships or residencies or research or whatever training they came in under that visa. The only way for them to get rid of that obligation is either going back home for 2 years or obtaining a waiver in the United States so they can stay and work. And one of the conditions to stay and work is that they work with the employer or the organization that sponsors that J1 waiver for 3 years. Unfortunately, we do not anticipate any changes in that category. For physicians specifically, we are going to hold a separate webinar before the end of the month, because there are still some of the legislation that they were trying to pass last year for physicians, favoring green card processes, excluding certain things, so physicians could become permanent residents faster, especially those who have been working through the pandemic and taking care of COVID patients. But the 2 years home residency that is not even mentioned. No one can say that's never going to change. I doubt it. It's been in the books forever, and I don't think that's one of those aspects of the law that they will ever change. But who knows? Another question is, what was the reasoning behind adjourning cases by up to 3 years because of COVID? Seems punitive if you anticipate a resolution to your case.
Well,
sure.
Ms. Wang, 100% agree. And the Biden administration, under one of these priorities, had talked about prioritizing and setting in those priorities because they want to avoid this delay. For example, if you had a removal hearing because of COVID, it got reset. Some of those hearings are out to 2024. Even if you have relief and you just have to wait to get to court. But the fact is there's not enough resources. So this is going back to one of those priorities that they mentioned that they want to reprioritize and put a system in place to that. So to avoid what exactly you're mentioning, the sort of punitive, I have to wait 3 more years, even though I know I can get my green card, I just have to wait to get in front of the judge. The wait is, depending on where you are, up to 3 years.
And let me just add and say something about COVID. And unfortunately, we had this pandemic last year that honestly, it's changed the way we all do business, specifically the federal agencies, because they are also subject to the restrictions we're all subject. So when it came to hearings, like for the question that just was asked, or interviews, or even fingerprints. Um, Let me just give you an example. For H-4 visas, um, individuals have to do fingerprints before the visas can be approved. So we have cases where the principal H-1B visa has been approved for months. We're talking 5, 6, in some cases 7 months or more, and we still have the H-4s pending because in some cases the fingerprints have not been taken. And the reason for that is because the agencies are working half capacity. So if in the past an office used to have, let's just say something, 10 appointments a day to do fingerprints, today they are only doing 3 or 4 because of social distancing, because of everything. So everything is backlogged. Hopefully, and I think that in that respect, the Biden administration may not be able to do a lot because we're still having this COVID situation, and we'll still have it for some time. Um, and I think it's about protecting not just the public but also the workers, the federal workers. So I don't know how soon they're going to be able to start uh, rescheduling things to take care of the backlog and reduce the processing times, like in this case from 3 years to maybe less. I have no idea, but the delays and pretty much everything. I don't know, Michelle, maybe you can give me a couple examples, but we have seen nothing but delays in the last years, and we just hope that we get back to some sort of normalcy in the next maybe 6 months. I don't know if I'm being too optimistic.
Well, I know we're out of time, but just to add on that very quickly, there is a track for emergency. We have been able to get emergency appointments for medical personnel, anything COVID related. We've had great success, but you're right. Regular processing for everything has just taken a slow track, and everything is cited as COVID.
Yes. And just one more question before we're done. Uh, One question we had this afternoon was whether the administration is thinking about doing premium process for H-4 visas. Premium processing for H-4 visas has been has been something people have talked about for years. The problem now with H-4s is that they need fingerprints. And because they need fingerprints, unless they get rid of that requirement, very difficult they do premium processing for that type of visa. They'll have
And
to
I'll add,
change it. Yeah.
I doubt they're going to take that around, because one of the biggest things of the push from the last administration, that this one seems to be consistent, is on background checks.
Yeah, exactly. The other question is whether H-4 regulations are going to improve in terms of allowing dependents in H-4 to work. Well, like we said, I doubt it. They won't get rid of the H-4 EAD, and that's improvement. Other than that, they in the future they might allow H-4 just to get EADs because they're dependents, but that's not in the books, so we haven't heard anything to that effect to this point. One more question and we're done. Any chance the Justice Department may consider holding cases via Zoom call? They're
I say
already doing it.
they're doing them with televideo from the detention centers to the courtrooms.
Mhm.
So my understanding is you will not be able to do, for example, Zoom hearing from your attorney's office. I don't anticipate that happening either.
No. And that in terms of litigation that is happening, but I doubt it. They're going to be implementing that for family-based interviews or employment-based interviews. But again, if this continues, who knows? But no, not that we know. That has not been talked about.
Well, that just leaves us a chance to have a follow-up webinar down the road.
Yes. So with that, we just want to thank everybody for attending, for being with us. Happy New Year. We wish you the best and hope that you stay safe and healthy through the year, that conditions improve, and that we get to see you again soon. And we'll keep you updated.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a good
for
night.
attending. Oh, we'll send you the recordings and the presentations. And thank you again. See you soon.